On the morning my son-in-law put his arm around my shoulder and told me that a man my age should know when to let things go. I had already let things go, just not the way he meant. He'd find out what I meant soon enough. They all would. My name is Raymond Kowalski. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer for a firm in Columbus, Ohio. And I can tell you this, the most important skill in my profession is not calculation, it's patience. You learn to read a structure carefully, quietly, before you decide where to apply pressure. That skill, it turns out, transfers. I didn't go looking for what I found. I want to be clear about that. Because some people hear a story like mine, and they assume the man must have been suspicious, must have been watching, must have had some itch that told him to start digging. I had no itch. I had a Tuesday afternoon in October, a cup of coffee going cold on the kitchen counter, and a laptop that wasn't mine sitting open on the table because my wife Carol had asked me to print something for her before she left for her book club. I'm not particularly fast with technology. Carol knows this. She had the document already pulled up. All I had to do was hit print. But the laptop was slow to respond, and while I sat there waiting, a notification came across the top of the screen. A name I recognized. A short message I was never supposed to see. 4 words. That's all it took. 4 words, and something shifted in my chest so quietly that I almost didn't notice it happening, like a load-bearing wall developing a hairline crack. I didn't print the document. I sat very still for a long moment. Then I opened the email thread. I want you to understand something, friends. I am not an emotional man by nature. My daughter Helen used to joke when she was young that her father came factory set with the thermostat stuck at 68. Not cold, just steady. Carol always said it was one of the things she loved about me in the beginning. Later, I think it was one of the things that frustrated her. I don't know exactly when steady became invisible to her, but I know the man whose name was in those emails. I've known him for 9 years. His name is Douglas Hale. He goes by Doug. He runs the landscaping company that's maintained our property since we moved to the house on Birchfield Lane. Good work. Fair prices. Always remembered Carol's preference for the hydrangeas along the back fence. Remembered her birthday once, which I thought was good customer service. I told Carol that. I remember her smiling at something on her phone when I said it. 41 emails, some going back 14 months. I read every one. I closed the laptop. I went to the sink and rinsed my coffee cup. I looked out the back window at the garden Carol had spent 3 summers building, the hydrangeas still full along the fence. And I thought about the particular cruelty of a betrayal that hides in plain sight. That waves at you from the driveway. That sends an invoice every month that you pay without thinking twice. Carol came home at 9:15. She was in a good mood. Book club, she said, had run long. They'd opened a second bottle of wine. "Did you get the document printed?" she asked, setting her purse on the counter. "Printer was jammed," I said. "I'll sort it out in the morning. You want some tea before bed?" "Sure," I said. She put the kettle on. I watched her move around our kitchen 34 years of mornings and evenings in various kitchens, in various houses, this woman and I felt something I don't have a clean word for. Not rage, not hatred, something older and heavier than either of those. The grief of a man watching something end that he didn't choose to end. I gave myself time. That is the only piece of advice I would give anyone standing where I stood that October night. Do not move until you know where you're moving. I spent 2 weeks doing what I have always done when a structure reveals a problem. I assessed. I documented. I consulted an expert. The expert was a woman named Patricia Oakes, family law attorney, downtown Columbus, 2nd floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. She had a framed cross-stitch on the wall behind her desk that said, "Document everything," and I decided immediately that I trusted her completely. I laid out what I had. She didn't offer me a single expression of sympathy. She picked up a pen and started asking questions and writing down answers, and that professional efficiency was the most comforting thing anyone had done for me since October. She asked if I had financial documentation, going back several years. I did. I keep meticulous records. 31 years as an engineer will do that to you. She asked about the property, about the retirement accounts, about a small rental property we owned jointly in Westerville. She asked about my pension. She asked a lot of questions, and I answered all of them. Then she leaned forward slightly across the desk and asked, almost as an afterthought, "Your wife's vehicle, is it jointly titled or in her name only?" "In her name," I told her. I had bought it for her outright 4 years ago. A gift. Her old car had died on the highway in February, and I hadn't wanted her stranded. Patricia made a note. "And the landscaping company," she said. "Did your wife have any involvement in the business relationship? Scheduling, payments, anything like that?" I thought about it. Carol had handled the scheduling. I had set up the autopay from our joint checking account. She had Carol's direct number. Patricia looked up from her pad. "Pull every payment record you have for that service, going back to the beginning." I didn't understand why at first, but I did as she said. And when I sat at my own desk 3 days later, going through statements with the patient attention I had once given to load calculations and tensile stress reports, I found something I had not expected to find. The landscaping invoices had been going up, not dramatically, $20 here, $30 there, since approximately 14 months ago. The same month the emails started, small enough that I never questioned it. The kind of adjustment that reads as routine inflation until you lay it all out on a single spreadsheet and look at it honestly. The total overage, across 14 months, just over $4,000, above the standard rate for the service level we were receiving. I pulled comparable quotes from 2 other companies in the area. The discrepancy was clear. Now, $4,000 is not a fortune. I'm not telling you this story because I was financially destroyed. I'm telling you because of what it meant. It meant Carol had been quietly routing extra money, my money, our money, through a service account to a man she was seeing. It meant this wasn't just an affair of the heart. It was deliberate. It was operational. It had a budget. I organized the documents the way I organize all my documents. Chronological, tabbed, clear labels. I called the folder Billing Discrepancy Hale Landscaping. Cleaner than the alternative. Patricia reviewed everything. She took her glasses off and set them on the desk and looked at me for a moment without speaking. "Raymond," she said, "you are either the most organized client I have ever had or the calmest. Possibly both." "Possibly both," I said. The divorce filing was already prepared. The Westerville rental property, the retirement accounts, the documentation, everything was in order. I was waiting for the right moment. Not dramatically, practically. The right moment arrived when Carol sat me down on a Sunday afternoon in December and told me she had something she needed to tell me. She had clearly prepared. She was wearing the expression she wore when she delivered difficult news, chin slightly down, hands folded, voice already tuned to the register of someone expecting to be forgiven. I had seen that expression 3 or 4 times over 34 years. When she'd dented the car in a parking garage. When she'd missed our daughter's school concert for a work thing she later admitted wasn't urgent. I knew the expression well. She told me about Douglas. She called it a friendship that became something more, which is the most dishonest, honest sentence a person can say. She said she had never meant for it to happen. She said she had been feeling disconnected for a long time, invisible, like she was living beside me instead of with me, and she needed me to hear that before anything else. I let her say all of it. Then I asked one question. "Carol, how long?" A pause. Careful pause. The kind of pause that calculates. "About a year," she said. 14 months, I said quietly. She went still. "Since the 4th of August of last year," I said. "Give or take a week." The color changed in her face. "I'm not angry," I told her, "and I meant it. But I need you to know that I know. All of it. And I need some time to think about what happens next." She cried. I got her a glass of water. That is the kind of man I am, even then. 2 weeks later, her son Brandon arrived. He is Carol's child from her first marriage. He is 38 years old, has strong opinions about everything, and has never once in 9 years asked me a question and waited for the full answer. He drives a truck with a very loud exhaust, and he had it parked halfway on my lawn when I came to the door. Carol was in the living room. Her sister Patrice was there. Her friend Donna from book club, which struck me as a significant overreach. And Brandon, who positioned himself near the fireplace with his arms crossed like he was preparing to deliver a verdict. Ray. He said he has called me Ray since the beginning, despite my preference for Raymond, which I mentioned once, and apparently he filed under optional Ray. I'm just going to be straight with you. You and Carol have 34 years. You've got history. You've got a life built together. And yes, she made a mistake. But a man who's been around as long as you have knows that marriages go through hard seasons. You throw this away over a hard season, that's not wisdom. That's just pride. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like he had just handed me a way out that I hadn't been smart enough to find myself. I looked at him. I looked at Patrice, who was nodding slowly with the expression of someone who agrees with everything happening in the room regardless of what it is. I looked at Donna, who had helped herself to the good shortbread I keep in the cabinet beside the stove, the ones I order specifically from a bakery in Pittsburgh, and was eating them with a focused enthusiasm that suggested she had not come for the conversation. I took a long breath. Brandon, I said, you are absolutely right. A man my age has to think very carefully about what he throws away and what he holds on to. He nodded, satisfied, the way a man nods when he believes he has just solved something. I appreciate you coming, I said, all of you. I just need a little more time to make sure I'm making the right decision. Carol looked at me with something that I can only describe as the first genuine hope I had seen in her eyes in months. She thought my calmness was the beginning of forgiveness. She was mistaken. What none of them knew as they sat in my living room, eating my shortbread and nodding at each other, what none of them had any reason to suspect was that Patricia Oakes had filed the divorce papers 4 days earlier, that the Westerville property had already been appraised, and the documentation of its value delivered to the court, that I had a second meeting with Patricia scheduled for Thursday morning to finalize the settlement proposal, that the billing discrepancy folder, 22 months of organized, tabbed, clearly labeled financial evidence, was sitting in my home office upstairs, in a manila envelope, ready. They thought they were talking to a man standing at a crossroads, deciding which direction to walk. They were talking to a man who had already arrived, unpacked his bag, and was simply giving them the courtesy of a brief conversation before closing the door. Brandon would find out what I meant. They all would. Here is what I want to tell you, friends, because I think people skip over this part. The weeks between finding those emails and Carol's confession were not easy. I don't want to make this sound like I moved through it cleanly, like some machine that processes betrayal without a bruise. That would be dishonest, and you deserve honesty. Every night, after Carol went to bed, I'd go down to the basement. I have a workbench down there, nothing fancy, just a space where I go to think with my hands. I'd sit on the stool, sometimes without turning on a single light, and I'd give myself 30 minutes. 30 minutes to feel the full weight of what had happened. The specific grief of 34 years, suddenly carrying a question mark at the end. The embarrassment, and yes, there is embarrassment, and any man who says otherwise is not being honest with you, of realizing that something had been happening under your roof, in your life, paid for in part with your own money, and you had not seen it. 30 minutes. Then I would go back upstairs, because I had work to do. I also want to tell you something I told Patricia, something she wrote down and underlined. I am not angry at Doug Hale the way people might expect. He is a smaller character in this story than people assume. Carol is a grown woman who made choices. Doug didn't make those choices for her. My anger at him, if I felt it, would be like being angry at a symptom rather than a cause. What I felt toward him was mostly a kind of professional disappointment. He did work for this household. He was compensated fairly. He violated the basic terms of that relationship, and in doing so, demonstrated that he was not particularly good at his job. That's all. What I felt toward Carol was more complicated, and more mine. And I'll keep most of it. The divorce proceedings were orderly. Patricia was exactly what she appeared to be, precise, thorough, and completely uninterested in drama. The settlement was fair. I kept the house on Birchfield Lane. It had been in my family before. Carol and I married, a detail recorded in documentation going back decades, which made its disposition straightforward. The Westerville property sold 6 months later, and the proceeds were divided according to the agreement. The retirement accounts were handled equitably. Carol got a settlement that respected the years she had contributed to this household. I was not interested in punishing her financially. That was never the point. The point was documentation. The point was knowing. The point was making decisions from a position of clear information rather than from hope or fear or anyone else's opinion of what a man my age should do with his own life. I met with each member of Carol's family individually. I want to be precise about this. I did not do it to hurt them. I did not do it to turn them against her. I did it because they had sat in my living room and formed strong opinions about my choices without knowing the complete picture, and I believed they deserved the complete picture before those opinions hardened into something permanent. I met Patrice for coffee first. She is Carol's older sister. She drove in from Dayton and arrived 12 minutes late and ordered a latte that took another 8 minutes, so I had plenty of time to arrange the folder on the table between us. I had made her a copy, her own set of tabbed documents. She picked it up without a word and read for a while. I watched her go from the first page to the third and stop. She looked up. "What is this from?" She pointed to a line. "That's a hotel charge," I said, cross-referenced with Carol's calendar. "She told you that weekend she was attending a conference in Cleveland." Patrice looked back down at the page. "She was in Columbus," I said. 12 minutes from this coffee shop." A long silence. "And these?" She turned to the financial section. "These are the invoices?" "With the comparable market rate highlighted in yellow," I said. "The differential is in the column to the right." Patrice set the folder down. She had the expression of a woman who had rehearsed a different conversation for a different meeting and now had to put it away entirely. "I didn't come here to cause pain," I told her. "I came because you sat in my living room and told me that a man my age should know when to let things go. I think you deserve to know what you were asking me to let go of." She didn't say much after that, but she held on to the folder when she left. Brandon was harder. Brandon does not receive information easily. He tends to process it as an argument he needs to win rather than a fact he needs to accommodate. We met at a diner near his office, and he spent the first 7 minutes telling me that he stood by what he'd said about marriage and hard seasons and a man's responsibility to his commitments. I let him finish. Then I put the folder on the table. "I'm not here to argue," I told him. "I'm here to share information. Whatever you do with it is up to you." He opened it, got about 4 pages in, stopped at the financial documentation. Something moved across his face, a shift that I recognized from 31 years of reading structures. The moment when a man realizes the load he thought was manageable is actually significant. "You said," I reminded him gently, "that if I walked away, I was throwing away 34 years over pride." He didn't look up from the page. "I need you to look at that folder, Brandon, and tell me which person in this marriage let the other one go." He didn't answer. He closed the folder. He slid it back across the table slowly, and then he looked at his coffee cup for a long moment, and he looked like a man who had a few things to reconsider. "I don't need an apology," I said. "I just needed you to have the full picture." I left him there. He called me 3 weeks later. A short conversation. He said he understood why I had done what I did. I told him I appreciated him saying so. That was the end of it. Donna got a phone call. I was not going to schedule a third meeting for a woman who had eaten my Pittsburgh shortbread without a word of acknowledgement and spent our entire time in the living room watching everyone else's reactions like she was at a play she had already reviewed. I summarized the relevant facts. She said, "Oh Lord," 5 times in 4 minutes, which I considered efficient. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in March. I called Patricia to confirm. She said, "Raymond, you were a model client." I said I had learned the value of documentation early. She said she hoped I would never need her services again. I said the same, and meant it, and I think she did too. I retired from the engineering firm the following June. I had been planning to work 2 more years, but I looked at the situation clearly and decided that the version of my life I wanted to build did not require 2 more years of the version I had been living. I was 63. I was in good health. I had a house on Birchfield Lane, a woodworking shop I'd been meaning to set up properly for a decade. and a daughter in Portland named Helen, who had been leaving me increasingly pointed voicemails about coming out to visit. I went to Portland for 3 weeks in August. Helen makes a kind of chicken soup that reminds me of my mother's, and she has 2 kids who are old enough to be interesting company and young enough to still think their grandfather is remarkable. I fixed a fence on her back porch that had been listing about 12 degrees off true. I taught her older one, a boy named Marcus, how to use a level properly. He took to it immediately. I came home to Columbus, and I set up the woodworking shop. I want to tell you about Carol, because I think you deserve the honest version. She and Doug are together. I know this not because I track them or pay them any particular attention, but because Westerville is not a large community, and people will tell you things when they think you might want to know. What I hear, through the ordinary channels of a life in a mid-sized city, is that the relationship has the quality of most things built on a foundation that wasn't solid to begin with. The romance of secrecy does not survive the end of the secret. What remains when the hiding stops is just 2 people sitting across from each other at breakfast, fully aware of what each of them is capable of. That particular self-knowledge tends to be uncomfortable company. I do not wish Carol harm. That would cost me something I don't want to spend. What I feel toward her now is something closer to the clean sadness you feel when you drive past a house you used to live in, and it looks different than you remember. It was real. It mattered. It's not mine anymore. Patrice called me in September. She tracked down my number through Helen, which told me she had put some effort into finding it, which I respected. Raymond, she said, I owe you something. You don't, I said. I do. Firm. Decided. The voice of a woman who has thought about something for a long time and arrived at a conclusion. I sat in your living room, and I told you what I thought you should do without knowing what you were actually dealing with. That wasn't right, and you handled it, all of it, with more decency than most men I've known would have. I was in the shop when she called. Working on a blanket chest I was making for Marcus, white oak, dovetail joints. I set down the chisel and leaned against the bench. Patrice, I said. How is she doing? A long pause. The kind that costs something real. She's managing, she said carefully. She's got some hard things to sit with. I know, I said. So do I. But I put mine down a while ago. We talked for a few more minutes. She asked about Helen and the grandkids. I told her about the blanket chest, about the dovetail joints, about Marcus and the level. She laughed at that. It was a real laugh, not a polite one. After we hung up, I stood in the shop for a while. Sawdust on the floor, afternoon light, coming in through the small window above the workbench. The chest half finished on the table, clean lines, solid construction, built to last longer than I will. Here is what I want you to take from this, friends. When Brandon sat in my living room and told me a man my age should know when to let things go, he was not entirely wrong. He just didn't understand what letting go actually looked like. Letting go does not mean accepting a story that isn't true. It does not mean sitting quietly while people who don't have the full picture tell you who you should be. It does not mean performing your own collapse for the comfort of people who made their decisions about you before they walked through your door. Letting go means you put down the weight, deliberately, on your own schedule, in your own time, not because someone else told you it was time, but because you did the work and earned the right to set it down. Carol made her choices. Doug made his. Brandon made assumptions, and then had to make room for the truth. Patrice earned a phone call in September by being willing to revise what she thought she knew, and I got my life back. Rebuilt it the way I build everything carefully, from solid material, with joints that hold. The woodworking shop is exactly right. The blanket chest for Marcus is nearly done. Helen is already asking about Christmas. There is a man in my neighborhood who has been leaving notes about a fence that needs repair, and I think I might take a look at it this weekend, just to see what we're dealing with. I went back to the dovetails. There is a satisfaction in that kind of work that I cannot fully explain to you, the way 2 pieces fit together perfectly, because you took the time to make them fit, because you measured twice, because you were patient enough to do it right. Some structures are worth building that way. Some structures, when you look at them honestly, were never as solid as you thought. And knowing the difference Knowing which one you're standing in that is not something a man learns by being told. That is something a man learns by being still and paying attention and trusting what the evidence shows him. You get quiet. You document everything, and then you build something better.